it's Kinpatsu Cosplay here, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this Shira cosplay. I really enjoyed the new Netflix series, so I wanted to make this costume for myself. It's also super comfy and relatively easy to make, so I'm going to show you guys how to do it now. If you guys would like to get some patterns for how to make this entire costume, they're available on our website along with a bunch of other cool patterns and tutorials for cosplay. So let's begin with the sewing. For my Shira sewing patterns, I made my patterns using some clothing that I had that was very similar to what I needed. I had a very similar shirt, a circle skirt, and I just used my leggings to pattern the shorts. But we also have some patterns available on our website that you can use to make your own Shira costume. Once I drew out my patterns, I then used some scrap fabric that was a similar stretch and made mock-ups of these to make sure that my items fit me. I then started to cut out my pieces. For all my white pieces of fabric, I'm using a fabric called scuba, which is a thick neoprene or thick lycra, which is really nice because it's not super see-through, but it's also really stretchy. The patterns I made were only for one half of my garment, so I had to draw them out twice, 2 pieces for the front and 2 pieces for the back of the shorts. I then cut out all my pieces of fabric with my scissors, making sure that I leave about a 1 to 1.5 centimeter seam allowance around the edges. Now that I finished cutting out the pieces, I can start pinning them together for sewing. So I took the one half of my shorts, the front piece and the back piece, and pinned them together all along the side and on the inner edge of the leg. You're going to pin together both halves so that when you're done, you're going to have each leg separately sewn together, and then we're going to combine them. Once the pieces have been pinned together, I'm then going to take them and put them through my sewing machine and sew all the way along the edges that I've pinned with a straight stitch. Now that we've sewn our 2 individual halves of the shorts, we need to put them together so that they form one piece. To do this, I'm going to take each half and lining them up at the center where the crotch is, I'm going to pin them together and then pin them all the way along to each end of the shorts. Then, just like we did before, I'm going to put it through my sewing machine and stitch all the way along the edge with a straight stitch. Now you can flip your shorts inside out and you can see they're finally coming together. Before we hem the shorts, I need to add a small detail on each side, which is a gold strip. So to do this, I'm using some gold stretch pleather, which I got from the LA Fashion District, and I'm going to be cutting out a fairly wide strip to put onto the shorts. So to put the gold strip onto my shorts, I'm going to be taking the strip I cut out, and with the gold side facing downwards, I'm going to pin this all the way along the seam on the side of my shorts. Once the gold fabric has been pinned in place, I can then take my shorts with the fabric and stitch all the way along the edge of the gold piece. Once the one side of the gold has been sewn down, I can now take that piece of gold, flip it over, and then fold the other edge underneath and pin it in place. This will then give us a really nice gold strip with a nice clean finish. It can be a little bit tricky, but just work your way up and slowly fold the edges of the gold underneath so it looks nice and neat. Now we can take the gold strip and sew down that other edge that we just folded in. Sometimes fabrics like stretch pleather can get stuck in the machine and it doesn't sew very nicely. To fix this, you can use a Teflon foot, or you can also use machine oil or Vaseline on the fabric to make sure it doesn't get stuck. Now to finish the shorts, I'm going to fold in and pin down all the edges along the top and the bottom, and then using my sewing machine, I'm going to stitch around them using a zigzag stitch. Zigzag stitches are great for stretchy fabrics and stretchy items because when you stretch them open, the seams will not split as easily as a straight stitch. Now you can flip your shorts back inside out and they're done. Let's move on to the next piece. So now I'm going to start sewing my circle skirt, which goes around the top of the shorts and underneath the shirt on Shira's costume. I'm taking my circle skirt pattern I made and I'm going to be drawing it out onto more scuba fabric. I'm cutting out my circle skirt pattern twice so that I can sew the two pieces together, and it'll not only look nice and neat, but it will have a little bit more structure because it will be a little bit thicker. I'm pinning my pieces together all the way around the edge, but leaving the middle of the skirt open. Then, using my sewing machine, I'm sewing all the way around the edges that I've pinned with a straight stitch. Now that I've sewn around the edges, I can take my scissors and cut off any excess fabric around the seams. I'm then going to fold the circle skirt inside out through the hole that I left in the top. Then, to make sure that the edge on the outside stays nice and neat, I'm going to pin it down and sew all the way along the top, again using my sewing machine. This will make sure that the fabric stays together in the shape that it's supposed to. And now our circle skirt is basically done. All I have to do is fold in the top edge and sew it down. Now for the most complicated part of the costume, the shirt. Shira's shirt has a lot of cool elements going on, from the design on the front to the spiky shoulders on the side. To start the process, just like I did before, I'm going to be drawing out my patterns onto the scuba fabric. Just like I did with the circle skirt, I'm going to be cutting out the pieces for my shirt twice so that I can have an inside layer and an outside layer. Once I finish cutting out all my pieces, I then need to start applying the decal onto the front piece of Shira's shirt. To make the big pattern on the front of Shira's shirt, I'm going to be using a gold iron-on vinyl. This material is really cool and really simple to work with. You're going to need an iron, the vinyl, and I use some baking paper to protect the vinyl and iron over it. So I'm going to be taking my gold vinyl and rolling it out, and on the back side of it I'm going to take my pattern and draw it out onto the vinyl with a pen. Then I'm going to take my scissors and a sharp craft knife and start to cut the shape out. Once the vinyl has been cut out into your desired shape, I'm then going to take the front panel of my shirt and line up this pattern very carefully on the front. I'm then going to take my iron and my baking paper and place the baking paper over the pattern and slowly start to iron it onto the fabric. Just be careful that you don't burn the vinyl or the fabric. Once you've finished ironing on the shape, you can then start to peel off the plastic film that is on the vinyl. And now you have a really cool, really neat looking pattern on the front of your shirt, and it was really simple to do. Now we can start putting the pieces of the shirt together. So I'm going to take my front panel that I ironed my vinyl onto and the two side panels that go with the front panel. I'm then going to pin them together all the way along the sides and at the top of the shoulders. I'm going to do the same for the back or inside section of the shirt. I'm taking the other panel and the other two side panels and pinning them together at the shoulders and all the way along the sides. Then I can sew the pieces together using a straight stitch and my sewing machine along the sides and on the shoulders. At this point, you should essentially have two separate shirt pieces that we're going to combine so that they're nice and thick and that they aren't see-through at all. But before we combine the pieces together, I have to add one more detail onto the bottom of the front piece of the shirt. So I'm taking the outer layer of my shirt and laying it on top of some gold stretch pleather that we used before for the shorts. Then I'm going to take a pen and outline all the way along the edge of the bottom of the shirt to make a gold strip that goes along the bottom of the shirt. I'm going to cut out the leather shape that I've just traced, and then using some pins I'm going to fold in the top edge so that it looks nice and neat. Once you've folded in the top edge, you can then start to pin it down onto the bottom of the shirt. Using my sewing machine, I can now stitch all the way along the edge of where we've pinned with a straight stitch and make it look nice and neat. Now that the gold edging is attached to the bottom, we can start to finally combine the inner and outer layer of the shirts. So we're going to take the outer layer and the inner layer and place them together. Make sure that the gold emblem is facing inwards and that the nice neat edge of the other shirt is also facing inwards. We want the raw edges on the outside, and we're going to pin them together so that when we flip it inside out, it looks nice and neat again. So I'm pinning the shirts together all the way along the bottom edge. I'm then going to sew all the way along the bottom edge with a straight stitch and my sewing machine. Now we can flip the shirt the right way round, and that bottom edge should look nice and neat. To keep the shape of the edge, I'm going to be pinning it and sewing all the way along the edge with a straight stitch again, just to keep it in place. I'm also going to fold in the hem all the way around the shoulder and then stitch all the way along it with a zigzag stitch. Our shirt also needs a collar, so I've cut out 4 pieces for my collar, 2 pieces to form 1/2. So I'm taking my 2 pieces and then stitching all the way along the edge at the top. I'm then going to flip that piece inside out and then pin the end and stitch along the top again to help keep its shape and make it look nice and neat. To add the detail edging along the collar, I've cut out a gold strip of stretch pleather, just like I've used on the bottom of the shirt. I'm then going to take this strip and start to pin and fold it all the way along the top edge of the collar. I'm folding the outer edge so that the hem is folded inwards and looks nice and neat, but on the inside of the collar piece, I'm just folding it over because we're not going to see that, and it's easier to make sure that you sew along both pieces if the back piece is slightly larger. Now I can take my collar and my gold edging and sew all the way along the edge carefully with my sewing machine. Once I've finished sewing the edging down, I can then take a pair of scissors and cut off any excess on the inside of the collar. The neck area on our shirt so far should look something like a pocket right now. So we're going to take our collar pieces that we've just finished sewing, and we're going to take the top of the neck piece and fold it inwards and then insert the collar and pin it all together so it looks neat and tidy. We're essentially going to fold and hem everything so that it looks really neat and that there's no raw edges showing. Once everything has been pinned down, I'm then going to sew all the way along the top of the white area on the neck piece, and this will stitch the collar and the hems of the neck piece into place. To get the top on and off, I need to put a zipper into the back. So I'm going to line my zipper up with the back of my shirt. Then I'm essentially going to sandwich the zipper between the 2 black layers, folding them inward so they look nice and neat, just like we did with the collar. So I'm inserting the zipper in between the 2 pieces of fabric and folding them and pinning them into place. I'm then going to use my sewing machine and stitch all the way along the edge of the zipper and the fabric and sew them into place. We're then going to repeat this same step for the other side, putting the zipper in between the 2 pieces of fabric, sandwiching them and folding them in so they look nice and neat, and then stitching all the way along. And now we can easily open and close the shirt so that it fits perfectly. For the gem detail on the front of Shira's shirt, I'm just using a pre-made Coppercon gem that I bought at a craft store. I'm then going to take some blue nail polish and paint it onto the back to give it some color. Once the nail polish is dry, I can then take some super glue and put it onto the back of that and then glue it into the center of my shirt. The final part of Shira's top is that she has these really big gold shoulder pads coming out the sides. The shoulder pads need quite a lot of structure, so I'm going to be using some EVA foam to make them. So I drew out my shape onto some 5mm EVA foam and cut it out. To get the shoulder pads to be in that pointed shape, I'm also cutting out a small groove in the center of the shoulder piece with a craft knife. Then I'm going to put some contact glue down the center, and when those 2 pieces are glued together, it'll form a nice bend and a nice V shape. Now I need to cover the shoulder pads in fabric, so I'm taking the shoulder pad shape and I'm tracing it out onto some gold stretch pleather. I'm cutting out the shape twice so that I can make a pocket for the shoulder to go into. I then cut out my 2 pieces of gold leather in the shape of the shoulder pads and pinned them together all the way around the edges, leaving the very bottom edge open. I sewed all the way around the pinned edge with my sewing machine and a straight stitch. Now you can flip the shape we've sewn inside out and it'll be a nice shiny gold color. Now we can take that EVA foam shoulder pad and put it inside of the gold pocket we've just made. I'm going to use a little bit of contact glue to glue the fabric to the foam around the opening. I'm also then going to stretch the fabric over the foam and pin it in place all the way along the bottom edge of the foam. Then I'm going to take that foam and that fabric and I'm going to stitch all the way along where I've pinned it so that it's nice and secure. Now that we've finished our shoulder pads, we need to put them onto the shirt. So you'll notice on the shoulder pads there's quite a large section of excess fabric. We're going to use that and then pin this onto the underside of the shoulders. So we're going to pin the gold excess fabric on the inside where the shoulders are. Once the shoulder pieces have been pinned into place, we can then top stitch with some white stitching all the way around the top of the shoulder again. And this will keep the shoulder pieces nice and secure. The final part of the sewing for this costume is the cape. I'm going to be using a cape pattern from a book called The Hero's Closet. This is a fantastic resource to have if you're a cosplayer and, like me, you struggle with sewing. So I traced out the pattern onto some pieces of paper, and then using this pattern I'm going to draw out the shape of the cape onto some red cotton. I've drawn out my pattern on the folded red fabric and I've cut it out. Now when I unfold the fabric, the cape shape will be perfect. I'm now going to start folding and hemming all the way along my cape. So to do this and make it look nice and neat, I'm going to be folding the edges not once but twice. This way the raw edge is completely hidden and you don't see anything when you stitch over it. Once I've completely finished pinning around the cape, which takes forever because capes are really big, I can then take it and stitch all the way around it with my sewing machine, which will also take forever, but at the end of the day you'll have a really nice big flowy cape. Now that I've finished stitching all the way around the bottom of my cape, I need to fold the top of the cape to gather the fabric for my shoulders. So I'm making two big pleats and pinning them into place. I'm then going to stitch over them with my sewing machine. Once I've finished stitching over my pleats, I'm then going to fold the very top of the cape where it meets my shoulders and stitch this so that it looks nice and neat too. To attach the cape onto my shirt, I'm just using some little press studs which you can sew into place. Now let's take a look at how the whole costume fits together. So I couldn't put the shorts on my mannequin for obvious reasons, but shorts go on as normal shorts do. Then, to put the skirt on, I'm just wrapping it around my waist and I pin it into place with some safety pins. The shirt can then go on over your shoulders, and at the back it zips up with the zip we put in. Here you can see how nicely the shoulder pads are also standing out. Finally, the cape attaches onto the small push studs that I attached onto the back of my shoulders on my shirt and onto the very top of my cape. I just press them into place. This was part 1 of our She-Ra cosplay tutorial. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll show you how to make her boots and her armor and headpiece for her costume. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.